so I have to admit I spend a lot of my time preparing my boss to do things like these, and but I'm really honored, I'm really grateful to NPRC for bringing everyone together to talk about what I think is a really critical issue. My interest in food systems began in my parents' kitchen. My folks were all about scratch cooking. My mom was a catering chef. Growing up, my dad ran food service operations, so it started in my stomach, and then it navigated to their backyard when they let me dig up a plot of land and really give tomato farm a go. But I've always had this interest in food, and always was trying to find a way to have an impactful change. So I think, like a lot of young kids, a few years ago, I thought, well, I'm just going to run off and buy a plot of land and farm like I want to farm, like I want our food system to work. But then I realized that that's a wonderful thing to do, and producers who are doing that, we need to support them. But as far as having an impact on the system, I think there's a real opportunity when you start looking around at some of our institutional dining operations. So there's some numbers, some studies that NCAT has done, and some other groups in the state to look at the purchasing power of our state institutions. And in 04 and 05, Montana institutions spent $33 million on food procurement. So if you think, I work in Missoula, the median income in Missoula is around $40,000, which is high for the state. And we tend to, in the food movement, really lean on this idea of, vote with your fork. So traditional free market theory is all about consumer demand. The consumer will go out, they'll demand what they want, and the market will adapt to that. But I think there are really great opportunities for a more intentional capitalistic system. So we have, at the University of Montana, sort of embraced this idea that there is more than just a bottom line there. We think about it in a common phrase that you probably have heard, but this idea of triple bottom line: there's people, there's profit, there's planet. So we look at our role as a state institution, and as an institution with this very large procurement budget. Last year we spent upwards of $3.5 million on food alone, as having a unique opportunity to have a very large impact on the food system. So we started our Farm to College program in 2003. It began with about $80,000 in local food purchases. So everyone has a different definition for what local food is. Our metrics are anything grown, raised, or processed within the state. As a state institution, we feel like that's an easy way to sort of measure our impact and our success. So in 2003, we spent $80,000. The program has grown every year since, to where last year we spent over $1 million on Montana food products. That's upwards of a third of our entire procurement budget. Which is great, and I will say I came into this position a year ago, so by no means do I want to take credit for that. There have been people working in Western Montana at the university in the Farm to College program for over a decade to make that happen, and to continue to push that program. But the result of that is huge. There's been some other studies, one that NCAT did a number of years ago, that looked at if all those public institutions pivoted 10% of their food procurement budgets to Montana Foods, that would result in anywhere from 10 million, or if you start to include a lot of these sort of ripple effects, upwards of $75 million in money put back into Montana's economy. So again, when you look at, it's great as consumers to go out and vote with your fork and to be intentional consumers and support the producers and the farmers and the businesses that are doing right by the food system. But I think we also need to pay a lot of attention to these large institutions that have these big budgets. And the university system is a really unique one. I think K through 12 has some more challenging regulations with the school lunch program. They tend to have somewhat tighter budgets, but they're doing wonderful things as well, as are a lot of the state prisons and state hospitals. They're all part of this group, and they all hold a lot of capital in their reserves that can have a huge influence on these economies. So, I think one of the most interesting and compelling stories of the Farm to College program that I'm often asked to sort of explain, and it is difficult because it's nuanced, but is that the program started in 2003 and our food costs were about 36%, which is a little high for industry standards, but about on par. So since then, we went from $80,000 spent on Montana food products to $1 million spent on food products. And our food costs have gone down every year since the program started. So we're now at 32% food cost across all of our operations. And that by no means is that local food is cheaper. Sometimes it is. We contracted with Bausch Potatoes out of Whitehall a number of years ago. And we talked to them about growing our potatoes and cutting them for our French fries. When we looked at their product and their prices, we sat down with them and said, what's your price point? What's going to work for you? How can your business be successful? We found that we got potatoes cheaper from them than we did off the Cisco truck. So that's a great story. It is not by any means the story every time, and it shouldn't be, because really the industrial food system has pushed a lot of those costs outside of their own operations. So those externalities that fall on people, that fall on low wages in the system, that fall on the environmental impact of it. You don't pay for that when you buy a dozen eggs for $1.50. So I try to steer people away from this idea that local food that's produced in a more sustainable way should cost us. We should do what we can to drop that price, but we shouldn't put all of that burden on the producers, on the farmers. We should find creative ways to make that a viable option for consumers, whether that's the individual, whether that's the institution, or what have you. And I think we really try to do that. So a lot of what we do is communicate. We have tons of stakeholders. We have nonprofits. We have farmers and producers. We have processors. The Western Montana Growers Co-op, I know Colin's going to talk about the Yellowstone Food Hub, has been a huge part of the success story of the Farm to College. They started in 2003 as well, and everybody at the co-op knows everybody at UM Dining, and we sit down a dozen times a year to talk about what are their challenges, what do we need, how can we buy more of their product. We share with them what our wholesale price is on a lot of products so that they know, okay, my price on carrots is way above the market average, and can I do anything to bring that down? And they might say no. They might say, I would lose money if I sold it to you less than that. And then, but they at least know where they need to be competitive, and we know that, they're doing everything they can to sell to us at a reasonable price. There's a lot of, they also partner with a nonprofit, the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center, which runs a USDA certified food processing plant up in St. Ignatius, or Ronan, I think. And so the co-op will then send product to the Food Enterprise Center that we don't have the time or the labor necessarily to process. And so the three of those parties will sit down and say, if we could get stick carrots cut to this length and this width, we'd stop buying baby carrots altogether. And so the Food Enterprise Center went out and bought the cutting die that they needed, and started processing all the co-op's carrots, and now we buy all the carrots processed from the Food Enterprise Center. And I think there are lots of creative solutions like that that we need to be really conscious of and really proactive with. I think one of my favorites is we have the Peas Farm, which is just north of town, and it's associated with the university. A lot of students take classes up there, and Josh Slotnick, who runs it, is a professor at the university. But they're a functioning for-profit farm with their produce operations, and years ago they were in need of a hoop house, but they didn't have the capital to buy the hoop house. So they came to UM Dining, and we made an agreement where we said, okay, we'll buy you this hoop house, and then you pay us back in onions over a 10-year period. So every year we buy several hundred pounds of onions in August and September from them, and until they paid back, or they send us the onions in return for payment on that hoop house. And that's worked really well for them, because farmers and producers are continually cash and capital poor. They're starved for time and resources. So I mean, if we can have someone with, a much bigger capital reserve step up and say, I'm willing to invest in you guys, and to say, you are producing in a way that we like, you're a local operation, but you can't make this happen without some sort of capital influx. We're gonna fill that void. And I think we've done that. We did that with Yellowstone grass-fed beef when we started contracting with them. They're a much smaller operation than they are now, and our purchases represented 50% of their overall sales, their annual sales. And now they're selling meat all over the world, and we're a fraction of their sales, and that's great, because they're continuing to push the practices of sustainable stewardship of the land, humane management of their herds, similar things that Jeannie's doing. And they were able to use our account as an anchor account. So they say, okay, now we have this, this reliable source of income, this MOU from the university that says we're going to buy X amount of meat from you every year. Now we can take some more risks because we know this is going to be coming in every year. And that's allowed them to scale up. And that story has been told with a number of different institutions and different farmers. So, I think, part of what I really want to do today, I guess, is try to shed that idea that, like, it is too hard, it's too expensive. And it's the first excuse everybody says. And we have a graph, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it today, but it shows that those two trends, so our increase in local food purchases and the decrease of food cost. And I think while that's not a simple story, what that does is it refutes that claim. When people stand up and they say, there's no way that I can afford to source local food, it's just too expensive, it's not worth it. I would beg them to reconsider that and be more creative and think harder about how can I make this work? How can I, as a consumer, support and invest in the type of food system that I want to be a part of? Thank you.